So, I'm sure you're familiar with the plug-and-play consoles like the Cool Baby and the Super Joy 3, which are usually poor in quality and feature dozens of stolen games. Generally, these consoles feature early NES and Famicom titles because they take up very little ROM space. But have you ever played this game? Or what about this game? These two games are different from all the others as they were programmed by Hwang Shinwei, who is basically an enigma in the pirating world. We know very little about this guy. Who is he, and what's the story behind his games? Well, I have some of the answers. Let's take a look. You guys like my new attire? It's a little big on me. What's going on, guys? It's Podrez, coming at you with yet another video. So, you guys ever use those cheap knockoff consoles like the Power Joy, or the Super Joy 3, or the Cool Baby? So, we're going to talk about a mysterious programmer who made a bunch of pirated games that commonly show up on multi-carts. These games are super common to the point where I bet pretty much everyone in my audience has played at least one of these games. Speaking of my audience, my last video did pretty well. Got 1,000 views within 24 hours, then it got another 1,000 the next day. Pretty solid. I really appreciate it, guys. So I noticed a bunch of new faces in the comments. Mrs. Griffin, Aiden Not Funny, Joseph DiCarlo, Francisco Fontora. I apologize if I'm missing anybody else. I really appreciate the support. Welcome to the channel. Speaking of newcomers, if you are new to the channel and you would like to be part of our community, feel free to drop a subscription. It's only a small thing on your part, but it helps me out greatly. So one of my viewers, 8-Bit Theologian, asked me if I could make a Discord community. Would you guys be down for that? I had thought about doing it, although we do have a little bit of a smaller community. I'm just not sure how active it would be, but if I do get a lot of support for this, I'll make it happen. Anyway, let's talk about pirating. You know what I mean.
PowerJoy is the dual-control video games console that simply plugs into your TV. With over 60 games to play, PowerJoy has something for everyone in the family. Brilliantly fast space games.
So, for those who don't know, a multi-cart is a single cartridge that contains more than one game. There were official multi-carts like Super Mario Bros. Duck Hunt, where as soon as you boot the game, you can select between either game. There was also the 6-pack by Sega, where you had 6 Genesis games to pick from, all in a single cartridge. Then you have the ones like the Maxi 15, where while they didn't get a license from Nintendo, they did have the rights to all the games that were included in the compilation. These types of games were really enticing to consumers because you're basically getting multiple games for the price of one. Of course, consumers are going to want more options. With this in mind, many pirate game companies made their own multi-carts, which rather than only having 2 games or 6 games, you would have 30 games or 50 games or sometimes even more than 70 games. These pirate game companies almost never made their own games. Instead, they would steal other people's work. You would commonly see early Famicom or NES titles on these multi-carts, such as early Konami games like Circus Charlie or Antarctic Adventure, the black box NES games like Clu Clu Land and Balloon Fight, and Namco titles like Pac-Man and Galaga. Obviously, these pirate game companies didn't have authorization to include these games. They would usually include earlier titles because they didn't take up a lot of ROM space, which meant you could fit in more games. You would see a lot of misspellings on the game list. Sometimes logos would be removed, some games would be renamed. These tactics may have been done in order to avoid copyright issues, but the misspellings could have also been just a mistake. Some of the pirate game companies made menus look nice with little animations at the bottom of the screen, or with a nice background. Other multi-carts were just a bare bones list. Some of these multi-carts had fewer games than they advertised. To make up for this, they would include ROM hacks, or sometimes they would include a duplicate game that started you off on level 2. These tactics were all done to pad out the game list as much as possible. If a multi-cart only features 10 games, maybe they can duplicate some of them, but start you off on level 2 or 3, and include some ROM hacks, and there, now you're at 20 games. Here's an example. Here we got King Kong 3. Alright, let's check it out. Oh, it's Donkey Kong 3. Alright. Oh look, Super Pac-Man. I didn't know this game was ported over to the NES. Oh, it's just a ROM hack of Pac-Man. So obviously these pirate game companies were doing very unethical practices. Not only were they ripping off the game companies that created these titles, they're also ripping off the consumers by lying about how many games are included. But these pirate game companies only saw one thing. They realized how much money they could make off these. Meanwhile, while all the others were doing the same thing, there was one pirated game company that showed a little bit more initiative. Let's check them out. So in the late 80s, programmer Hwang Shinwei had an interesting idea. Rather than make a compilation full of other people's games, he would program some of his own. A lot of his games would be published by the company RCM Group, which we'll talk more about later. Since he was only one person and didn't receive a lot of help from other programmers, a lot of his games featured assets that were stolen from other titles. For example, one of his first games was BB Car, which was inspired by Rally X. Rally X is a Namco arcade title where you collect all the flags and avoid the other cars. You could use smokescreen to temporarily stun the other cars, and there was a map where you could see what flags were remaining. Shinwei's game was obviously inspired by Rally X. While this is a ripoff, I gotta give it some credit. The game plays very well, with every aspect of Rally X being properly implemented, like the map, the smokescreen, the nice controls. While this is unauthorized, this is a great recreation of Rally X. So here's a question, why make a clone of Rally X? Well, Rally X never received an official NES port. This was most likely Shinwei's strategy to recreate beloved games that didn't have a presence on the NES already. That way, if consumers liked Rally X, their only way of playing it at home was the unauthorized version. Shinwei would continue this strategy with other games he developed as well. He brought Sega's arcade game Columns over to the NES under the name Magic Jewelry. This is definitely Shinwei's most popular game, and you commonly see this one on multi-carts. It's a Tetris clone. You line up 3 pieces in a row, including diagonally, and they disappear. The controls in this particular version are a bit too responsive and slippery, which can really mess you up. The game is also really bland. There's no gameplay variations or any way to customize. You just press star and it brings you straight to the game. I feel like more should have been done here. So anyway, a lot of assets were stolen from other games. For example, the Statue of Liberty and skyscraper art was ripped straight from the game Go-Go 13. The music is just a rendition of All Kinds of Everything by Dana. The track from Stage 3 is from Altered Beast, which is another game by Sega. Despite the thievery though, the game is playable, and the graphics and sound, even though they were all stolen, present a good atmosphere. Once again, this is a fairly well-made game. They also made Magic Jewelry 2, where you can customize your game a bit more. You have more backgrounds to choose from, probably stolen from other games, and you can customize what your pieces look like now. They even added a 2-player option, which is nice. This one is definitely more well-polished. So another game you tend to see on multi-carts is Brush Roller. This is a recreation of the arcade game Make Tracks. It's a Pac-Man clone where you gotta paint the entire stage a certain color. There's enemies you gotta avoid, but you can destroy them if you use one of the 2 rollers that's on the stage. I find this particular version a little bit too easy. They start you out with way too many lives, and the AI is very exploitable. The game doesn't appear to get any harder when you advance to the later stages either. Once again, Shinwei decided to recycle assets from other games. The song All Kinds of Everything was used once again, just like in Magic Jewelry. There was a ROM hack of this game that was included on the Cultron 6-in-1 cartridge called Boogeyman. Same exact game, but with slightly modified graphics. I prefer the original one. Overall, this is playable, but it's too easy and it gets boring fast. So part of the reason this game and Magic Jewelry show up on multi-carts a lot is because they take up only 24 kilobytes of ROM space each, which is low for NES standards. There's actually Atari 2600 games that take up more space than that. Next up is 3D Block, which is a port of the arcade game Blockout. Is there seriously a naked woman on the title screen? I thought we were done with adult games. It actually doesn't make any sense why Shinwei did this. Who was this game marketed for, adults or kids? I don't know. And once again, the song is All Kinds of Everything. What is Shinwei's obsession with this song? Anyway, it's basically Tetris but 3D. You can turn your pieces in numerous directions, just like in normal Tetris. You have to line up the rows perfectly in order to score points, just like the original game. When you do score more points, the game freezes for a second. At first I thought the game crashed, but that's actually normal. That's a little absurd, don't you think? So while a 3D perspective is really ambitious, it's very confusing to play and it's easy to misalign your pieces. You have this map on the right which is supposed to help you, and the graphics are shaded in a specific way in order to help you understand the perception better. Basically, Shinwei tried everything he could to keep the player from being confused, but it's still difficult to see what you're doing. But still, this game is very playable, and I'm impressed this is on the NES. So all of these games I've talked about so far have one thing in common. They were never officially ported over to the NES, so Shinwei's versions were the only way consumers could play them at home, and they're decent home versions of the game, so it was really smart that he made these games. With that said, this plan would backfire with the game Block Force. This is a translation of the arcade game Quarth. It's a puzzle game where you have to turn all the pieces into perfect squares and rectangles, and if you're too slow, you lose. It's actually a really fun and addictive title. At the time, there was no NES version of this game, so it was the perfect title to recreate. So Shinwei's version looks really nice, but the gameplay is a bit clunky. The controls are more stiff, so in general your response time will be much slower. That's not good considering this is a very fast-paced game. It's not a bad version of the game, but the arcade game has much smoother controls. To make matters worse, Konami ended up porting this game over to the NES after all. Here, the controls are smooth just like the arcade version, so yeah, Shinwei's tactic of making the only home version of an arcade title didn't work out here. So in conclusion, even though a lot of assets were stolen from other games, a lot of these recreations were actually pretty well made. These aren't Color Dreams games with bad frame rate, boring gameplay, or poor graphics. These are fairly competent titles, although not perfect. So we talked about his games, but who actually is Hwang Shinwei? As we can see, he was credited for all of these games, but after 1991, he fell off the face of the earth it seems. Who is this guy, and what happened to him? So what do we know about him? Not very much. He's a game programmer, he's from Taiwan, his favorite song is All Kinds of Everything. That's pretty much it. Supposedly this is a picture of him. This was found in the source code of Block Force, but we don't actually know if this is him or someone else. The reason we don't know much about him could be because he was hiding his identity in order to keep himself out of trouble. So it's believed that Shinwei worked on a majority of these games by himself, which might explain why he stole assets from other games because he didn't have a lot of resources. Really impressive that he made these games by himself, if that's even true, but there's still a chance he did receive some help. So what happened in 1991 that made him disappear? Well, prior to his disappearance, the pirate game company RCM Group was publishing a majority of Shinwei's games. They would get published as standalone cartridges, but would also be included in many multi-carts. In 1991, the vice president of RCM Group was arrested for their involvement in counterfeiting Nintendo games. It's speculated that the vice president was in fact Hwang Shinwei himself, but we don't know this for sure. It's unclear if he was arrested or if he changed his career path because of what happened at RCM Group. Despite Shinwei retiring from developing games, his legacy would live on in the pirating world. His games would continue to be featured in multi-carts and plug-and-play consoles, such as the Power Joy and the Super Joy 3, which came out in the 2000s. Even some present-day plug-and-play consoles occasionally feature his games. So a lot of pirate game companies were putting a bunch of unauthorized games on a single cartridge in order to make a quick buck. While a majority of Hwang Shinwei's games feature stolen assets, he at least developed his own games. Despite being unauthorized, they were actually fairly decent in quality, with presentable graphics and music, and fun gameplay. This would be unlike many unlicensed game companies like Color Dreams. So while the actual identity of Hwang Shinwei remains a mystery, his legacy in the pirating world lives on today. Hey, thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like rating. It only takes a second and it gets my video noticed by more people. Also, if you enjoy my content, drop a subscription, that way you'll be notified when my next video comes out. Plus, it's completely free. Finally, drop a comment if you have any questions, suggestions, or just want to share your gaming experiences. This greatly helps the YouTube algorithm, and I'm usually pretty good at replying back. Anyway, have a good one, guys.